right, thank you so much, Linda, and thank you to everyone. It's been quite a joy to attend this meeting and to meet the Scientific Nutrition Advisory Council yesterday, and I'm just so delighted to be here to talk a little bit about seafood and nutrition equity. So as Linda stated, I'm vice president at a company called Food Minds, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that in a minute. But just to give you some background on me, I'm from Baltimore, where seafood is a little bit of a way of life, where I grew up eating steamed crabs and, really looking forward to that every summer. And where my mom, a single mom, put seafood on the table, whether it was canned salmon and salmon cakes, or sometimes it was just fish sticks, but it's always been a part of my diet and something that I've always really loved. And I was delighted when I became a dietitian and actually learned all the benefits of seafood and that this was sort of undeniable. I started out, became vegetarian. That was kind of what got me interested in nutrition, gave up all animal foods. And then class after class after class just kept hammering home these health benefits. And I'm like, okay, I've got to add seafood back into my diet. And that wasn't hard to do at all. So let me tell you a little bit more about Food Minds. And I'm pressing the green button. There we go. So before I get into my talk on seafood and equity, I'll tell you a little bit about my company that I'm at. It's called Food Minds, and Food Minds provides consulting and communication services to a range of clients throughout the food sector to help them meet their business and public health objectives. So what makes us so unique, it's a company where there are 21 dietitians on staff, just ready to help you solve whatever kind of nutrition, science, public affairs, food values, or communications needs that you may have. And we actually work with a couple of clients throughout the seafood industry, and it's a delight to get to meet some of these folks today and to be representing Food Minds. I also love this artwork. We are consumed by food. I get to think about food all day long, and that is absolutely a joy for me. So to give you a little bit of background on this topic of nutrition security and food equity. So I don't know if folks have been following along the lexicon in terms of how this is talked about, but when I was in school, it was all about food security and food insecurity, which is basically people having access to enough food, being able to get enough food in socially acceptable ways. So you're not scavenging for food, you're not going to emergency food, you have enough money to just afford food. And that was the term for many, many years, up until really earlier this year. USDA codified a definition of nutrition security, which builds on food security. So it's still important to have enough food, but what is that food? What's the quality of that food? Is it the right food that will help you maintain your health, or if you're ill, restore you to health? This is all baked into this definition of nutrition security, which also includes an element of equity. So we know across the board, there are certain groups that have been historically marginalized that are always falling to the bottom of all of the health statistics. So these are racial and ethnic minorities, low-income populations, rural and remote populations. So nutrition security says we have got to focus on those populations. And so, if you all are also following along this conversation in this very building, next week is the White House Conference on Hunger, Health, and Nutrition. And I was very anxiously, for Food Minds, we have to be smart about these things. And when we saw this Tufts Report come out, these are the groups that are informing and making the strongest recommendations to the White House of what should be done. So I read this 130-page report from Tufts and was delighted that one of the key parts of the strategy is to increase nutrition security by promoting dietary patterns that align with the dietary guidelines for Americans throughout our federal nutrition programs. And this is just such a wonderful statement to see, because we know that seafood has a very strong and prominent part in our dietary guidelines for Americans, thanks in part to Tom's work on the committee. And since that 2015 report, it's just grown and grown in terms of recognizing the health benefits of seafood. The other thing I did as a good scientific nutrition advisor for S&P, I scoured this report for how many times is seafood mentioned. Where does it say about seafood? And I found seafood mentioned 8 times in this 130-page report. And I said, let me just do a search for vegetables. Another good, healthy group, 33 times vegetables are specifically called out in this report. And I think that it should be on par. Seafood, right? Vegetables are important, and so is seafood, and both should be an equal focus in terms of advancing nutrition security. And this pattern that I see in this report is one that I see throughout our nutrition program. So you all don't need a reminder. This is the dietary guidelines recommending at least 8 ounces of seafood per week, and even more if you are pregnant or lactating, even more if you're following the Mediterranean pattern in the dietary guidelines. So there is no question, seafood is here in the dietary guidelines. And so this chart just shows what all the different food groups from the dietary guidelines and how we're doing in terms of meeting them. So when you see that line dip deep below and have that long blue line, that means a large percent of the population is not meeting intake for that particular food group. So all the vegetables, and they divide it out into subgroups, so dark green, red and orange, beans, peas, and lentils, starchy, we're very low. We're low in fruits. We're not consuming enough whole grains. Dairy is very low. And last but not least, we see that 90% of the population is not meeting the recommended intake of seafood. And so, yeah, the seafood line there. So when you take a look out a little bit further and look at our nutrition programs and how they are promoting these patterns, as you see, vegetables are called out here, and not only just vegetables, but each one of those subgroups is required in this school lunch pattern, right? So it exactly matches and mirrors what is recommended in the dietary guidelines. Does anybody see seafood on here? Is that at all called out? Is it a required element at all? It is not. And so, this is a way that the dietary guidelines are not being mirrored in our federal nutrition programs, and we are ignoring a very important food group. And I don't have to tell you all about the benefits of seafood, but what is important also to recognize is that these health disparities that are so persistent are actually not getting any better over the years. When you look at the gaps in maternal mortality, when you look at the 5 times higher rate of death of African-American mothers over the age of 30, when you look at rates of diabetes, when you look at heart disease, all of it is off the charts. It is divided out very starkly by race and income, and these programs are meant to help us narrow this gap. And this is a program that touches 30 million kids a year. And I'll tell you, as a kid, I tasted broccoli for the first time at school, and I came home with hard questions for my mom, which is, why aren't we having broccoli? And she went to the store and started buying broccoli. So oftentimes, kids do get exposed to things which they then take home. So, I think it's very important for us to keep these things in mind. So I also did an analysis myself of the USDA Agricultural Marketing Service purchases on commodities. So USDA purchases foods, which they then package up and send out to food banks across the country. They send to Indian reservations. They send some of them to schools. So when you look at spending that they're reporting on these different food groups, seafood makes up 3% of the food they're spending on the foods that they're boxing up and sending out across the country. How is that going to help us bring that line up when we are just absolutely not putting our money where our mouth is when it comes to paying attention to seafood? I'll also mention this huge program called the GusNet program. GusNet is short for Gus Schumacher Nutrition Incentive Program. And I got to write a GusNet grant for a previous employer. And this is a fantastic program, but where nutrition incentive program is really shorthand for a fruits and vegetables program, which is fantastic. No shade to fruits and vegetables. But this program lets you either do one of two things. You can use the GusNet dollars to increase people's purchasing powers of fruits and vegetables at the store. So maybe they spend $10 on fruits and vegetables and they get a $10 voucher so they can get $10 more worth for free. Or they're doing prescription programs where a doctor screens you and says you would be a good candidate for this fruit and vegetables prescription, and now you can get a voucher or you can get a bag of fruits and vegetables sent to your home. I think this is wonderful, and I just keep wondering what would happen if we actually doubled people's ability to buy seafood. We know that seafood can be expensive. Now, it is available at all price points. But there was a recent study in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition that looked at omega-3 rich seafood by race and ethnicity and income, and low-income people were consuming significantly less of the high omega-3 fatty acid seafood. So what would happen if we were able to incentivize that, cut that price in half with government dollars? That would probably help us boost our intake. And then last but not least, I'll talk just for a second about the WIC program, which, if you're not familiar, this is our Women, Infants, and Children program that serves about 6 million people a month who are either pregnant or lactating or have children who are up to the age of 5. And they can get all of these foods which are deemed to be helpful in terms of child growth and development, healthy pregnancy, healthy lactation. And fish is on the list, yay! But the disparity here is that fruits are available, fruits and vegetables, you can get any form. Fresh, canned, frozen, dried. For fish, you can get canned tuna, canned salmon, canned mackerel, that's it. Don't try to get sardines, don't try to get fresh fish, don't try to get frozen fish. Those are the options when it comes to fish in the WIC program. So, I think there's a lot of room to grow in terms of our federal nutrition programs and how they are supporting people in being able to consume seafood. When we talk about this idea of mental health, the focus of this very conference this year, when you look at mental health disparities in terms of access to treatment, that again falls out really starkly among racial and ethnic and income lines. So being able to have these programs support this may be something that could be very, very powerful in a group that is not able to easily access mental health services or mental health treatment. So I will advance to the next slide and just close out by saying, I can tell you how the government is pushing up every one of those lines that is low except for one, and that is seafood. And it's really, room for improvement. I'll tell you what, Food Minds would love to get together with anybody in this room who would like to put their minds on how to solve this issue, because we're not going to eliminate health disparities if we don't do more to advance the role of seafood and help people afford it and make it easier to access for low-income communities. My slides are just not, okay. There we go. So I'll just leave you with a goal that we establish seafood as an essential part of health equity and nutrition security programs. We cannot let the word nutrition just be synonymous with only certain underconsumed food groups. It needs to be synonymous with seafood as well. So I thank you for your time. It's a pleasure to meet you all and look forward to your questions.